Hi, Mike. So I think tonight I'm just going to go over a few little things here to get you started down the road, so to speak. And first, I think I'd start with just the most basic thing, which would be your knowledge of key placement. So, of course, middle C is in the middle of the keyboard, roughly halfway between the top and the bottom of the keyboard. Middle C is easy to identify. All C's, for that matter, are easy to identify. They always are followed by the two black notes. So there's C and then the two black notes, which is C sharp and then D sharp. So middle C is the starting point today. We'll look at a C scale. We talked about the formula the other day. Before we even get to the formula, we want to talk about the fingering. So in the right hand, the C scale fingering is thumb, second, third, and then thumb under, and you complete the scale with the remaining 5 fingers. On the way back down, you reverse that. 5 fingers down, and now third finger over, and the remaining fingers. So once again, it's thumb under after you hit the third note, and continue on. And coming back down, third finger over, and we'll just name these notes too: C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C. C, B, A, G, F, E, D, C. Now the formula, that's a major scale. A major scale, I like to think of a major tone as a happy sound. That's major. And then of course the opposite of major, I guess, would be minor. Major and minor. So those are probably the two most basic chords in Western music. And the major scale is easy to identify because it consists of the beginning note followed by a whole tone, a half tone, another whole tone, I'm sorry. So 2 whole tones: whole, whole, half, whole, 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 and half. And of course, you just repeat that on the way down. And the reason we're doing it in C, of course, is because there are no black keys, no sharps or flats that are obvious. It's pretty simple. You're just going up. That's the only place on the piano where you could start and never have to play any black notes to get a major scale. If I play a major scale on D, it's a form of a minor scale because I'm not following the formula of whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. Here I would be going whole, half, and then whole, 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 half. So it's a different formula when I start on a different key. And so I hope I'm not getting too far ahead here, but again, we'll go back to C. So that's an important thing to start with, just getting the fingering with your right hand. When you're practicing this, I want you to focus on a very consistent interval between each note and a consistent pressure on each key. I don't know what kind of keyboard you have, but try to be uniform in your touch and the velocity, the speed with which you push the key down. Reason being, you want to be able to have control over your dynamic range as you advance. So I could play it very softly. Or on the other hand, I might decide I really need to cut through a loud background sound. Now Now, I recommend playing with the lightest touch possible because that tends to develop more articulation and control as opposed to being very heavy-handed in the beginning. So when you're playing, I want you to concentrate on being light, very light, and the light touch. Now, let's look at the left hand. Typically, you would start one octave lower for the C scale in the left hand. The left hand fingering is a little bit different than the right hand, and I'll show that to you now. I'm going to start up here just to make sure that it's in view. Normally I would start it here, but I'm not sure what angle we have for this setup. So we'll start here. So we're using all 5 fingers, and then when we get to the G, we're crossing over our 3rd finger and continuing on to C with the remaining 3 fingers. Coming back down, we're going to cross over after we use those 3 fingers again. So instead of crossing over, actually we're crossing under. So we're going to come down 1, 2, 3, and now put our thumb under like that. It's hard to see probably, but I'm just putting my thumb under my 3rd finger to continue down, and then I play the remaining notes with my remaining fingers. Pretty basic, really. Now, the goal is at some point to be able to do it 2 hands together. So, and very evenly like that. Once you get that down, that you can do that up and down, then I would say the next step would be to do it in 2 octaves and 1 hand at a time. When you do it in 2 octaves, it's pretty well the same. There might be a little bit of a difference. It's been so long since I taught this, I'm going to have to review it live, so let's go. Okay, so when I get here, instead of completing the scale, because I'm going to carry on another full octave, this is where my thumb goes under, and we start all over again as if we were starting from scratch. So my thumb goes back to C, and then I just follow the initial fingering that we had for the 1 octave scale. And on the way back down, everything's the same till I get to here, but now I'm going to put my 4th finger over and my 3rd finger over to complete it. That's not too hard, and it won't take you long to master that. In the left hand, it's a similar structure as the 1 octave. I'm going to come over with my 4th finger and finish off coming over when I run out of fingers with my 3rd finger over my thumb for the final 3 notes and the final 3 fingers. Coming back down, thumb under after the first 3 fingers. Now, when we get here, we're on our 4th finger, but since we want to go down another whole octave, we're going to start all over again by putting our thumb on C. So thumb under, on to C, down 3, and now the thumb under, and complete it. So there you have it. You've got your C scale in both hands, double octaves, single octaves. I don't expect you to be able to do double octaves right away, so practice on your single octaves so you're very comfortable with that. Another thing about practicing too is that a lot of people want to get up to speed very quickly, but I recommend a very slow gait at first. Eventually you want to be able to go very fast, but to be able to go fast, you need to be able to go really slow first, like most things in life. So don't be afraid or think you're not doing as good as you could by going at this speed, because this is what creates muscle memory and good technique. So just keep it nice and slow. Each note, the same pressure, the same time. So those are 2 basic scales, and just another feature that goes with scales, of course, is chords. And your most basic chord is your C major triad. And when we say triad, well, it's pretty obvious that tri-3. The triad is a 3-part, 3 notes to the chord. And in a C scale, the major triad, the C major triad is C, E, and G. And it's a major triad, of course, because it's a major chord, and there's your major tone right there. A minor triad would drop that down half a tone to make it into a minor chord, or a C minor triad. So once you listen to the difference between these 2, it's pretty apparent. One's kind of an upbeat sound, the other one's kind of melancholy. There's other notes that can be involved in a minor scale as well, or you can extend a triad to be a bigger chord. The other note that's typically used in a minor would be a minor seventh. So the seventh is, here's your seventh. There's two different seventh chords. There's the dominant seventh, which is, for our purposes today, we're going to take a C major triad, and then we're going to add the seventh. That's called a dominant seventh. Now, a major seventh is, you drop this down half a tone, you take your B and drop it down to B flat, and then you get the major seventh. Major and dominant. Now, why do they call it dominant? Well, I think it's because this note almost takes over the rest of the chord. When I add that, it's a standing note, so I think that's why they refer to it as dominant. Whereas major, there's your seventh. This makes it the major. Now, if we wanted a minor seventh, again, the difference between a seventh and just your regular triad, major and minor. The seventh adds more attention to it, and it wants to resolve usually. Quite often a seventh chord might be used at the end of a phrase or towards the end of a song, a passage, it wants to resolve, to go back to something. It creates attention, so that's a good chord to know. The most common chords in popular music would be your major, your minor, your sevenths. Another popular one that's used quite a bit is your augmented chord. Augmented sixth, so you take there's a sixth and an augmented sixth. So it's another chord that's used in popular music. And the final one that we'll work on today, or I'll just show you for that matter, is your diminished chord. A diminished chord is, you take your major triad, but you drop the third and the fifth down half a tone. Now, typically when you're playing a diminished chord, you'll usually use it in conjunction with a seventh. So let's try that. Here's our major seventh, and then we're going to take it into a diminished seventh. So it's kind of more of a melancholy, a bit of a somber sound too, as opposed to your major chords. So there you have it. Those are some chords that you can think about. Now, another thing that's really important is obviously building up independence of your fingers and finger strength, generally speaking. These three fingers here, the last fingers on our hands, tend to be, well, the last two in particular, are rather weak. They have less controlling tendons and muscles in them, so that you're not able to articulate as well. And typically these fingers need more work to be able to function as well as the thumb and the index finger and your middle finger. So some bright person by the name of Hannon years and years ago invented different exercises for the piano that work on those types of things. I'll just show you one. I'll just do it with one hand for now, and it would start on a C again for today's lesson. And we'll just start on C, and then we're going to go up to A, and then we'll just, rather than name the notes, I'm just going to play this very slowly, and you can follow along. Whoops, it's been a long time since I did these. So what you see that I'm doing here is I'm just walking up one white note. We're not going to say a whole tone or a half tone because it's not always consistent in this scale. When I walk up from here to here, I'm walking up a half a tone. But for ease of understanding, we're just going to do it in this, starting on the C, and come up one white key each time we resolve the first part of it, meaning come up one. So what I'm doing, I'm just shifting. Those are my starting and ending notes. I'm just shifting them up one each time and filling in the middle with that pattern. Sorry, I'm kind of messing it up there for you, Mike, so I'm just one more time. So that's the upward motion, and go as slow as you need to go, even if it's and so on and so forth. Coming back down is a little bit different. There's many different ways to come back down. I'll show you a relatively easy one today. We'll start on C, and basically you just skip the first note, and with your fourth finger you come to the next note, the neighbor of that note. So you go, and then you just walk down with the remaining fingers. So like this. Skip. All notes back up. Skip. So you're skipping every time you come down one note from the top. Skip. Skip. And so forth. Now, it's very good to have a range of the full keyboard. I don't think you can see the full 88 notes on this keyboard with my current angle, but if you were going to practice these scales, obviously most of the music takes place in this general area of a keyboard, but there's lots of times you might want to play down here or play down there, like you might play a bass line down here somewhere, and your treble would be up here, so you need to have that full range of motion to be comfortable with it. So I would typically do my scale. Sometimes I might even do them hands apart, like a couple octaves apart. Now, before I even get to that, let's show you this in the left hand. Sorry. So what you can see here is that just because I made a mistake, I want to make sure that you understand what I'm doing. I'm coming up 6 notes. So each one of these intervals is 6 notes for this exercise. And we just fill in the middle by that descending pattern. Back down in this instance, I think we skip again. It's actually easier in this hand, I find. So you're just skipping the note, skip, 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 skip. All right, so that's pretty straightforward. Now, again, at some point, this would be the result you hope for, to be able to do them hands together. Take it as slowly as you need to be able to do it evenly and steadily and with even pressure and dynamic range and all that. So never go faster than you can do it accurately. I guess that's the best way to state it. If you want to go really fast but it ends up in sloppiness, then you're actually holding yourself back. It's way better to start very slow and get everything right and then work up to a higher tempo. And you would start down here eventually and just work your way up the whole keyboard. And so forth. You just want to be able to right up to the top and back, and that will get your fingers supple. There's many different versions of that particular exercise that we can go over with time, and that's a fair bit of work for you right there. Fingering is important for scales, as I mentioned. The other things that we would approach at some point would be arpeggios, which is basically a broken chord. So that's a chord, and an arpeggio is when you play a chord, it's separate notes as components in a repeating fashion. And an arpeggio would usually have 4 notes per octave, because fingering, otherwise it'd be impossible. I mean, I don't know how you could jump to C very well unless you had 8-inch long fingers. So we'll use an example of a C dominant or a major 7th arpeggio. So there's your major 7th, and the rest of it is just the C triad chord. So there's your first 4 notes: thumb under, fourth finger over onto your B flat. That's called the C major 7th arpeggio. And fourth finger over in the left hand. One of the things that really helps when you're practicing is to practice with different touches and different rhythms. This is something that is really helpful to help get your sure-footedness, I suppose, put it that way. So a rhythm practice for a scale may be something like this. So in that example, obviously, I'm putting the emphasis on every second note with more dynamic range, more pressure, more pronunciation of that note. I could do it in threes. Let's just call practicing in twos because we're accenting every second one. But in the three, we go. So as you can see, by doing that, you're controlling certain fingers more so than others. You're creating that expression, that power, and by learning that and practicing that, of course, you're going to have way more control and more able to express yourself when you're playing the song, because songs aren't Instead, people like songs that go. They like expression and dynamic range, different qualities that bring music alive. And the other thing, of course, is rhythm, in that I could play that song like. So I'm just playing it with a straight rhythm, but I could decide I want to, mess with the rhythm and make it a bit more exciting. So I could go. Rhythm and time signature, all those different things are things we'll work on at a different point. But I sense that you've got really good senses of all those things already, and you won't have any problems mastering that, I think, when we get to it. I think I'll just call it a day for this particular video, because I think that's a lot to work with. And if it's not, by all means, just let me know right away, and I'll put something together a bit more challenging. And of course, we've got all these keys to work with. You've got your major A, B, C, D, E, F, G, A. Those are your major, those are the names of all the different keys on the piano, but there's actually, between here and here, there's actually 12 tones, not just 8, because you've got your sharps, and these are called your accidentals. So, one more quick thing before I wrap it up is your chromatic scale is another thing to learn. Chromatic just means every note. So used quite often for emphasis and little filigrees and things like that in music. And it's also just a good finger exercise to practice. So a chromatic scale obviously sounds like this. And I'll just play it a bit slower for you. You could start anywhere with the chromatic scale, because you're always playing each half tone. So I could start here. again, use expression and use time. So when you're practicing this, don't be afraid to mess with the time. Like, and so forth. You just want to have fun with it and develop your technique and your strength, hand strength. Left hand similar. And of course, hands together. And at some point you'd want to do them hands. Another thing that we like to do is contrary motion in our practicing. So, and back together again. Yeah, so that's contrary motion. And scales, you would do the same thing. There you go. I'm going to stop now. Cheers.